Welcome to our program, Life on the Big Bear Farm, featuring Diane Cordial and her daughters, Cathy and Anne and Carolyn. And I believe Marilyn might be driving down from Cleveland soon. So if you are seeing extra people, that's the answer. Diane and Chuck were married in 1961, the same year that he became farm manager for Big Bear Farms at the request of Wayne Brown. The girls were all born in the 60s, so today they will share some of their memories, and they are great ones. Our program for October 10th is being pre-recorded on August the 20th. It includes remembrances, photos, and stories, lots of stories about their lives on the farm. I liked one of the things that Anne said about movies are made about places like Big Bear Farm, and growing up there was filled with memories and moments children everywhere can only dream of. Cathy shared that it was an idyllic childhood and created by her parents, Chuck and Diane. Carolyn said the entire farm was a playground. So, and you'll hear that today. We hope this program will be a special one for you. I am Carol Wilhelm, a longtime volunteer, and I wanted to thank today Linda Miller, who's our program chairperson, and also Alan Miller, who is our videographer. This video and others may be accessed from our website, powellhistory.org, under the video tabs, or from past program details. So people, you can refer this information, you can use this information to let your friends know that they can watch this anytime. And now we would like to begin with Mom. Did you all call her Mom?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I did too. Mom is going to talk about the history because she knows it best.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. And I will be using notes so that I can keep some of those facts straight. Though Big Bear is no longer physically in Powell, reminders of it plainly remain to the informed eye. The white iconic fences surrounding the developments off of Powell Road pay tribute to Wayne Brown, the founder of Big Bear, who wanted the farm to be a showplace in the community. The fences outlined the original farm and were Mr. Brown's way of establishing it within the community. So also remain the silos from the original farm, standing in what is now the Giant Eagle parking lot. The commercial developments to the north and south of State Route 750 were once entirely farmland, the silos structures that dominated the landscape rather than ones which blended in with it. And though physically Powell looks different, the impact of Big Bear on the community, we like to think growth remains unchanged. As Carol said, I'm Diane Cordial, and I've lived in Powell since 1961. My husband Charles and I came from London, Ohio, in Madison County after we got married in November of 1961, when Chuck became the manager of the newly purchased Big Bear Farms. We lived there from 1961 until it closed in 1996. In 1961, Wayne Brown, founder and owner of the Big Bear Stores Company, purchased the farm previously known as the Grandview Inn Farm as a showplace where he could raise cattle for beef to sell in his grocery stores. He chose white fences to outline the boundaries of the farm. White fences have become a hallmark in this area and can still be seen throughout Powell. Wayne Brown and his wife Ruth enjoyed coming to the farm for weekend retreats. Wayne Brown was a man of vision. He grew up on a 40-acre farm in the southern part of Ohio near Colton. After graduating from high school, he went to Detroit to work in an auto factory and at the A&P grocery store, working as a part-time clerk. He eventually rose to a general superintendent responsible for 240 stores. It was there he came up with the idea of the self-serve supermarket. Supermarket was a new word. His plan was to let customers browse around the small store and select their own purchases at their leisure and place the items selected in a small wicker basket which they carried on their arm. They would take their basket of groceries to the front of the store and pay for them. When the idea of self-service was not accepted by the management, they ordered him to stop. They were afraid that the customers would steal. He then quit working for A&P and started the first self-serve supermarket, Big Bear, in Central Ohio in 1934. The store was located on Lane Avenue in a former roller skating rink. The Riverwatch apartment building now occupies that space. This was the only available building in the area large enough to try this new venture of stacking carloads of merchandise out on the floor where customers could pick it up and take it to the front of the store and pay. The city of Columbus was stunned, and it was an instant success. Big Bear stores continued to grow and succeed. In 1961, my husband Chuck was working at the Orleton Farms, a 5,000-acre farm in Madison County. His boss, John Sawyer, introduced him to Mr. Brown, who was impressed with Chuck's work ethic and attitude and hired him on the spot to manage his newly purchased Big Bear Farms. They had a father-son bond which lasted until Mr. Brown's passing in 1976. As a young married couple, we were thrilled to have a house and utilities provided as part of Chuck's job. 3 additional houses for other farm employees were built on the farm. Wayne Brown and his wife, Ruth, also enjoyed staying on the farm during their weekend visits. Their home was a beautiful 2-story brick house that later became known as the Party House. There were several buildings on the farm. 2 barns were later added to house and feed cattle. Silos were constructed as needed, 4 in all, to store the corn to feed the cattle. Large trucks would transport cattle, usually year-old Black Angus breeds from out of state, before going to market and eventually to the meat counters. An innovative feed system which augured the corn from the silos was established. With a push of a button, the feed was deposited into feeding troughs. Visitors came to see this and were impressed by the more efficient method of feeding. The barns were regularly cleaned twice a week. Mr. Brown did not want the neighbors to complain about the odors. Corn and soybeans were the primary crops raised. To justify the purchase of the large tractor and combine, Big Bear rented additional area farmlands. Farm employees drove the large tractors and combines on and off the farm. It was not unusual for the large tractors to be driven down Sawmill Road or onto High Street to fields rented by Big Bear. We had horses which were used to round up the cattle but were also fun for our family and friends. One of the big ventures was when Mr. Brown decided to bring Jack Bailey and Gene Cagney and the Queen for a Day television show to Veterans Memorial in Columbus. My husband Chuck purchased a new Western outfit, and in his Western attire ushered a steer right onto the stage. It was such fun and fortunately worked out. The Ohio State University Veterinary Clinic managed the medical issues of the cattle. When the veterinary staff was not always available, Chuck and employees were called upon to help deliver calves and nurture them as needed. Our daughters even got to bottle feed some of the calves. Occasionally, cattle would break through a fence and onto the road. Every member of our family has scurried, run, and chased the cattle. Neighbors helped as needed. Chuck and I soon felt at home in Powell. Chuck enjoyed visiting with Max Ricci at the Powell Hardware at the corner of Powell and Liberty Roads, where the Japanese restaurant is now located. We met the legendary families of Powell, Melvin Morgan, Fire Chief and his wife Poodle, Clara Landstrom, the proprietor of Clara's Market, Fred and Rhea Reeves, owner of the Red and White Grocery. Also, Elsie Plummer and the Andersons of Plummer's Trading Post, the Huffmans who owned Countryside Travel Oasis when campers became popular. We later met Betty at the carryout, the Doolins at the post office, and the Askins family who owned draft horses. Through 4-H, we met the Cornish family, the Wrights, the Carmichaels, and many others. We had good times with neighbors, the Cosgrays, Laws, Shoups, Rosses, and Fishers. The Tullers were special neighbors who lived across the road from us. Eddie sold his delicious sweet corn in the area where Starbucks is now located. It was the best. We enjoyed the Morris family's Powell Pizza, sandwiches from Morgan's, later Barbie's Dairy Twist in Powell, and now Local Roots. With Carla's Beauty Shop and the Askins Barber Shop, Powell pretty much had everything we needed. A special lady, Jean Kirkham, patiently gave piano lessons to many students, including our 4 daughters and 3 granddaughters. Mr. Kirkham was the mayor of Powell. Our neighbor Jay Gardner and his friends met daily for card games at the IOOF Lodge Hall above Clara's Market, now the Craft House number 5. Under the watchful eye of Constable Pendleton, we felt safe, and we were at home in Powell. In 1965, I became a 4-H leader for Powell Hearth and Shuttle, a club primarily focused on sewing and cooking. We often met in the basement of the Powell United Methodist Church in the heart of Powell. I was an advisor for 25 years. Chuck enjoyed meeting the neighboring farmers. He took pride in his participation in the Liberty Township Fire Department. When the telephone rang, Chuck grabbed his gear and headed to the fire. Mel Morgan was the chief at the time. There was a good camaraderie among this group. When Big Bear stores were sold in the 80s, the farm remained in operation until 1996. The shelter and main house were used for weddings and celebrations. In 1996, it became clear that the farm would be closed due to the sale of the Big Bear stores. We were sad to see the end of our time at the farm. Chuck decided to retire and we remained in Powell, but moved to a home on Jewett Road. I still shop at the farm, which is now Giant Eagle. It is comforting to see the reminders of Big Bear Farms, which are the 2 remaining silos.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that covers a lot, and we can maybe go back to some other things. Now maybe the girls would like to share some of their memories, you know, a favorite memory that you have from when you were the most young. And who would like to begin?
Well, like Carolyn said, it was like a playground. And my earliest memory was when I was 3, learning how to ride a motorcycle. It was a little Honda 50. And our dad always taught us not to be afraid of anything. And so I had learned, I'd watched my sisters ride. And so I just got out there and ran around rode it around the yard and was hooked on the toys ever since.
In addition to that, some of the other toys that we were privileged to get to be a part of were snowmobiles, riding around the farm on snowmobiles, riding the horses that were mentioned. I remember being very little and I could see underneath the horse as Dad was trying to put the saddle on the horse, and I could look underneath it and then having him boost me up to try to get my feet to reach in the stirrups. So it was just fun to grow up in a place where you could go outside and build forts or tree houses or play in the haymow and make tunnels. And then of course having our friends over was always special because they liked to do all those things with us as well.
Did you each have your own horse?
No, there were 3. Apache,
Dodger and Clegg.
Yes. No one rode Dodger, he was wild.
Only Dad could ride Dodger because he liked to buck.
Right.
And so he always liked to, get Dodger back on her hind legs. And I do remember one picture in particular of our sister Marilyn, who was in front of Dad when Dodger bucked once, and he just held on to her, and Dodger bucked, and then Mom came over and said, "I'll take Mary."
They did use the horses for rounding up the cattle.
Uh-huh. But
And,
you got
and
to-
Clegg, I think, was the only one you would ride because it was
Yes.
very calm.
Very calm.
the only one that Mom would ride?
Was Clegg, right?
Clegg.
Because it wasn't in a buff or anything. It was very mild. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a big sled that the horses would pull in the snow.
Oh,
And so we would all pile in there and just, ride all over the farm.
Cathy, can you describe how you relate it to something that we're all familiar with these days?
Oh, yes, yes. So whenever the snow would fall, we all, pretty much, people in the community had snowmobiles and we loved to ride them for fun. And of course, there was a lot of room to do that. So we never really knew how to just kind of get everybody together. So the way that we would know it was time to ride was if we were in the house and we would hear snowmobiles circling the house saying, "Come on, suit up, let's go, it's time to ride." And I think now if people did that, it would be a text message. But our modern day would be texting. But back then, whenever we wanted to all ride snowmobiles throughout the community, we would hear the snowmobiles roaring, just circling the house. And that was the way we were supposed to suit up and get out and ride. And we would just go on long trail rides with whomever was out at the time, and we would go on the roads and the fields, and the train would just get longer and longer. Snowmobiles.
Yeah, like how many do you
Oh
think?
gosh, I think we could have a dozen or even
Uh-huh.
more at any given time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And in
But that-
those days, you
yeah.
could get around Powell
Yes.
basically through the field, the cornfields.
Mhm.
So we could go from the farm across the road to the Tullers, across the street then to what was then Murphy's Party Barn, and we'd go around the track of Murphy's Party Barn for fun.
Oh,
And then we'd drive through Powell and we'd pick up Mr. Eisnicker and the Morgans, and everyone would just join the trail. And then we could stay basically in fields all around Powell because then it was such a rural farming community, and that's what made it really fun.
Even down to the zoo where Safari Golf Club is, that we would ride
Oh, right.
all there, and then we'd go up Liberty Road to Delaware.
oh, really?
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
That's right. We go on the golf course.
And Diane, you would make hot chocolate. For
Yes, I
tons of
always got
people.
hot chocolate and cookies when they came back in frozen.
The best hot chocolate.
It's homemade.
Is that right?
With cocoa and milk and beaters to make it frothy.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
guess Starbucks now has different machines that do that.
Right,
But we
right.
kind of got the
We can start-
frothy.
That's
So
hot
don't
chocolate.
kid yourself. Mom wasn't inside making cookies and hot chocolate the whole time. She was an adventurer herself. And one memory I that comes to mind is when I think Ann was driving a snowmobile and Mom was on the back. We tied sleds to the back, and then of course the driver would try to kind of go around and make the person on the sled fall off. So we were back at the picnic area by the pond, and Mom was on a sled, and she took quite the tumble, and I think had a
concussion.
Had a concussion as a
Well,
result.
the area was icy. We got on ice instead of snow, and just when I bounced off, I hit the back of my head.
So we made the hot chocolate that night.
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm sure you had a lot of adventures too with, a big family and the other families that live there on the property.
And the neighbors.
Yeah. And I think you said there were like 350 acres on the
Yes.
farm proper
Yes.
there, and then the additional acreage for the rental fields that you did for the soybeans and the corn.
Yes.
And they went all the way down to,
Bethel Road across from what used to be the bowling alley. So that was one of the kind of far farms. And the other one was up on High Street near Home Road. So those were the farthest ones.
And sometimes during the harvest, Dad would work long hours, and his other folks who worked on the farm, and Mom would pile us in the car, and we would pack a dinner or lunch, whatever it was, and we'd go to the field, and we'd see Dad pull over the big tractor, and then we'd kind of have a little picnic and say hello, and then he'd say, "Well, I got to get back to work." It was our way to see him when we got home from school or that night if he missed dinner, and those were good memories. In fact, one great memory I have is when I was in 3rd grade and I won some kind of award in school and I got a letter from the principal and I wanted to show Dad and Mom said, well, let's go show him. So we drove all the way down Sawmill Road to Bethel and Sawmill and got out and Dad thought, of course, something was wrong, but because it was the middle of the day and he wasn't expecting a meal.
Mhm.
And I ran all the way, from the road to the tractor to show him, look, I got this letter from school. And of course, he got out the tractor and gave me my hug and was excited. But that was a memory that I remember because Mom supported me to go see Dad and we all got to celebrate
in the
together.
middle of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They never wanted to stop the tractor, so we would take the lunch out there.
Or sometimes Dad would let us get up, we'd get up in the tractor and sit on his lap and he'd stare at sandwich and then he'd be like, all right, time to go.
It
Yeah.
wasn't very long.
It was what?
It wasn't very long,
Uh-huh.
you would just
Okay.
say.
I wanted to ask about the neighbors setting up softball and kickball in the streets. Where was that exactly?
The corner of Sawmill and Powell.
Yes.
So where
With Tim
United
Hortons.
Dairy Farmers is.
On the other
Yes.
side where Tim Hortons, because that's where my grandson is.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
So we're Tim Hortons.
Well, I think we just didn't know that there was that what we lived in, this rural community, that there was anything different. It was just, you go outside anytime you want, you ride your bike on the road and on the driveway, wherever. And so the neighbors happened to be a quarter of a mile away was the nearest neighbor. So we would just load up the softball or kickball equipment and whoever was available would, just ride their bikes down Sawmill Road or Powell Road. And imagining doing that now is, obviously not, it was very different back then, but if we wanted to play, it wasn't like there was a neighbor, 20 yards next to us that we could all go out and play. So we just found each other in the yards and the streets.
And we had great flag football games in our front yard because it was long and looked like a football field. And so we did that a lot too.
And girls softball was just coming into being at that time. And so you got started with that. And that was a big activity because the only other activity you had was 4-H, which kept you busy in the summer, but you enjoyed the softball.
Yes. That was great.
Yeah, it was definitely different than our kids, I think, now have because we didn't have all the travel options. We didn't soccer, lacrosse, that sort of thing was not really around at Olentangy at the time. And so I remember the Sunbury All-Star team, we needed green shirts and hats, so I borrowed my dad's John Deere green hat. It was the only thing I had, so that was my uniform.
Yeah.
And your dad also just improvised with whatever was at the farm for you. Was it only you, Cathy, to practice, or were both of you, Carolyn and Ann, involved in sporting events at the school
We
teams?
all did, yeah. So Dad put a basketball hoop on the side of the one of the buildings, and then we had a tennis. We hit the tennis ball against one of the buildings, and we would climb up on the roof and get the balls if they went in the gutter. And then when I was running track in junior high, he took a sawhorse, painted it Olentangy blue, so I could use it as hurdles, practicing the hurdles. And then he measured out the driveway to back of the lane to what was I think at the time we did 440 yards, now it's 400 meters. But the distance of a track distance, and said, okay, if you start here at the sidewalk and you go back to the new barn, and that's your 400 meters. So he would help us, support our sports efforts that way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Without males in the family, except for him, he supported what you were interested in doing, and with creativity and love.
I think that's one of the things in hindsight that I value most about our time at the farm and my parents is that you would think that a farmer who had 4 children and spent a lot of time harvesting crops over a couple hundred acres at the farm and then another 1,000 or so acres in the community would value boys. Well, I don't have any sons. He never complained that he didn't have sons. he just expected us to do anything we wanted, and encouraged us to do anything and not to be afraid, but he always emphasized safety. And so he would say, you know, climb the 60-foot silos, and we would say, well, you know, maybe is that safe? He was like, only if you let go, don't let go. And so, you know, it was just kind of like, you know, why be afraid? Just be safe and try new things. So that's how I think the snowmobiles and the four-wheelers and the activities led to a very good kind of life in general, and setting us up to do things when we were adults.
Well, and also you were doing some chores. You were painting all that white fence, which was kind of a lengthy process. Mainly Carolyn and Cathy. I'm not sure about you, Ann, but that was an endeavor.
Yeah, it was. He expected us to just do whatever they asked, which were they were boys or girls, and just work hard. And we also learned to mow the grass. So, and what the process was like, which is for Dad, he was very meticulous in his, you know, keeping everything looking beautiful for the community and for us. And so, you know, there's a process to trim first with the push mower, and then you do the riding mower, and then of course you go out and weed eat afterwards. And to this day, I'm the one who takes care of our property, for my family, and because it's something we enjoy, and it reminds us of the farm, and reminds us of Dad and all the things he taught us. And I remember the first time my husband mowed our grass, I was like, oh no, that's not right. You gotta trim first, and then you can do the riding, and he was like, all right, Chuck, in respect for that, because he always taught us the right way to do things. But the other thing that I think is an overall theme for growing up on the farm and what Mom and Dad taught us was the life skills that we now have taken forward and that we try to teach to our children. And those are the skills of hard work and a work ethic and being accountable for, you know, and be responsible, and not just in the way we grew up in our faith and with the church and family at the center, but also the example they set of giving community service. So being part of the Powell community, giving back through volunteer fire department or advising us in 4-H, the things that we learned as kids through that farm experience and through what our parents taught us has really served us well as we've gotten older, just a little bit older.
I should tell a story about you at your painting. They were kind of creative when they painted.
You're really going to talk about that, okay?
This is why I was never allowed to paint, because of them, what they did.
You could tell what they did because you were back there grinning.
Let's be honest, it wasn't easy being a man with 4 daughters, and we weren't always interested in farming, so we did have this job for $4 an hour in the summer to paint those white fences to make sure they were up to Dad's standards, and mow the grass, I think twice a week.
Mm-hmm. And at the time, by the way, we didn't have some of the things that we enjoy today in terms of we manually had to scrape the fence before we painted it, and then we painted it with brushes. We didn't have like what we have today, which is the big spraying capability to have it done and much more efficiently in a much shorter time period. So go ahead.
So we attached a little wagon to the lawn tractor. We put the painting supplies on that, but we also were very interested in getting a suntan. So we wore halter tops and baby oil to get the suntan, and we took a little portable black and white television, battery opera television, and put it on there so we could listen to probably like soap operas or something like that, which I think that drove Dad a little bit crazy, but we still did it. And then there was the cattle barn that faced Powell Road, had a big, I guess a heifer or some sort of a cow on it. And so it was black.
Sorry,
and the barn was white and the cow was black. And so Carolyn and I thought one day that we should add some anatomy to the.
Just make it anatomically correct.
Make it anatomically correct with the white paint. So.
This is why they were not Charlie's Angels, as it said on the boat that we had, and which eventually went onto the Playhouse over on Jewett Road where we live. Charlie's Angels 2, but Charlie's Angels 1 was the boat, but they clearly were not the Angels.
Well, 1 out of 4 wasn't bad.
But no, Dad only lasted till we went into work, that anatomically correct steer. And then we came out from lunch and Dad was like, let's fix that. He didn't think it was funny as we thought it was, but it's been a good memory.
Yeah.
But it was constantly like out like mowing or and once you finished it was almost time to start again because there was so much acreage. And I remember for 4-H I did safety speaking, so practicing my safety speech on the tractor going back and forth for the 4-H.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my dad said, you know, doing this work is not going to help you realize what you want to do the rest of your life, but it's going to help you realize what you don't want to do. So that was always stuck in my mind.
Yeah.
And there was the garden that you had to help with as well. We had a large garden.
Huge garden.
Yeah, so our garden was over an acre, and that was a big process. I think, so Dad was responsible for the rototilling, and we learned that whole process. And then I remember him physically taking stakes from one end to the other, and with a long piece of twine, so we would have our rows straight in the garden. And half the garden at least was always sweet corn, because Mom was a big sweet corn fan.
Huge.
So we would plant it, and then of course, you know, when it was time, when it was ready, we would go out there and Mom would say, I need some corn for dinner. So we'd be responsible for going out and getting the corn and husking it, having it for dinner. But we also enjoyed, through the years, you know, we grew watermelon, cucumbers, zucchini, great beans, lettuce, which Mom used to make really great wilted lettuce with the hot bacon.
They like that.
And we probably should clarify, she may be the sweet corn queen of Powell because I believe at one time her record was she ate 13 years of corn in one meal.
They say that, and I'm
Yes,
sure that's
this
not
is true.
right.
It is.
They say.
That was our entree, was corn. Sweet
That's
corn
why
many
half an
times.
acre was corn.
Because she didn't want it to go to waste.
Oh, I'm sure they're making this up.
And then after dinner, all the corn cobs went to the horses. We would take them out and the horses ate the corn cobs. But
The garden, there, that was my least favorite chore because we had to weed, and I remember I
Yes.
wasn't allowed to go to my friend's party because I didn't get to weed. So
Oh, really?
I'm not bitter about it, I just remember that.
What was that date? Who was that friend?
But we would always take it, like I said, Mom didn't want to let anything go to waste, so when we had extra sweet corn, we all sat at the table with our places in front of us, and we would cut the corn off the cob and bag it in baggies and put it in the freezer. She would can the tomatoes, so during the winter, we'd have wonderful spaghetti sauce. And
Pickles.
pickles. And one year we grew popcorn. I don't know if it was more than 1 year, but I remember specifically we grew popcorn and learned that, you know, after it's ready, then you have to hang it up through the winter. And we had to hang, you know, these little bundles of popcorn, you know, it looks like corn, but harder kernels hanging to dry out. And then when it was, you know, after the winter, then we would again have to get it off, get the kernels off, and then we'd have these bags of popcorn. There was homemade popcorn. And even though our hands were blistered, and it was a fun thing to know you're eating what you grew in your garden, and we had lots of fun doing that.
I'm pretty sure my husband proposed to me over Mom's canned tomatoes.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think that got him.
He did like the canned tomatoes, didn't he? But I recall a few boyfriends actually sitting around the table cutting the corn off. Remember that?
No, don't remember that.
Yes.
Whose name shall remain.
Yeah.
Well, everyone always got involved, you know, and it was fun having friends over. They always knew if you came to our house, you'd be fed well. And usually you'd have things, you know, from the garden, and everyone got involved in the activities, whether it was playing kickball or snowmobiling, or, you know, just being part of it as the community.
The 3-wheelers and 4-wheelers were the big draw, I think. A lot of my friends, when we had the 3-wheelers, we had to teach them not to put their leg down, and so they all had the little, you know, tire marks on the back of their leg. That was kind of a rite of passage if you would spend the night. And they also liked spending the night on a school night because our driveway was so long and we never knew when the bus was coming, and we were usually late running out there. But when we were early, we would play statues, walls, the brick walls that lined our driveway, an entryway. And that was pretty fun with the Tollers next door.
So the Big Bear Farms subdivision now still has the same white brick entrance.
Right.
And that was what our driveway looked like for the farm. And we had an electric gate there. And so when we drive by now, the Big Bear Farms subdivision, that is exactly what our driveway.
And sometimes
used to-
Cathy runs out and jumps up on the gate and does statues. Occasionally.
And of course, in that subdivision are names of the president, Wayne Brown, and the vice presidents who over the years. So,
Our street names.
yes.
And I feel bad for our bus drivers because Dad would sit in the one end of the house and look and see when the bus was coming from Sawmill Road and say, girls, the bus is coming. And Mom would be busy packing our, finished giving our lunches, or we'd eat our last bites of eggs that Mom would make us in the morning, and we'd run across the driveway. And Linda Fisher was one of our bus drivers forever, and she was always so patient and kind, waiting for now the crew. We had to wait for the Cordial girls. And Ruth Yang, she drove for us for a while. So they were always, again, you're all, each other in the community, and so they knew, they're coming and what the routine was.
The greatest thing about Mrs. Fisher and Mrs. Gearing was when we would go through Powell, where Craft House number 5 is, that was Clara's. And so she would have to do a circle, so she would let us off and we'd run into Clara's and get, like blow pops or whatever. And then get back on the bus, and of course they wouldn't do that today, but
Yes.
he did.
Another activity you enjoyed was the water skiing that you learned. Learned to put your skis on in the pond, I think.
Right, because that was the hardest thing. We taught, I think, half of Powell how to water ski, but the hardest part was getting the skis on. So Dad would have us take them back to the pond and put the life jacket on and just practice taking them off and on, because you would struggle with that and one ski would float away, and then it would be frustrating when you're in the boat. So we had to practice, and I think.
So we skied in the Scioto River all our lives. And one of the things I remember is, one, it was nice that Dad could take us during the summer, like in the middle of the week or in the middle of the day when most people would be working 9 to 5 or something like that. But at some point he decided he was done with the boating and he was going to give it up to us when we were maybe college or something. And so we were taking the boat out for the first time. And by this time, Powell Road was busier and Powell was bigger. Maybe it wasn't a village anymore. And we turned right out of our driveway to go down to the Scioto River, and the boat kept going straight. So it wasn't, we had not firmly attached it to the car. So fortunately there was no oncoming traffic, but the boat ended up in the Toller's yard, which is now where the Kroger is, and we were going this way, and then shortly thereafter we sold the boat.
And I remember when that happened, Eddie and Lillian Toller were sitting outside in their lawn chairs, as we all often did, and just chatted and hung out. And so they kind of helped us, get the boat back on, and okay, there's no traffic coming, but that was a scary memory, because I was like, didn't I teach you? This is how you put the boat on and your safety. And so we're like, oh, sorry, Dad. But those boating memories were wonderful, because it was time. Dad loved spending time with us on the boat. And one of the things he would do is, we always liked to sunbathe or whatever, and he didn't like that. He wanted, let's go, when are we going to ski some more? So he would take us, we'd do a little, like a break from skiing, and he'd take, just north of Home Road, there's a little bait shop, and he'd pull over like it's a car. He'd dock the boat on the side of the river, and we'd all just get up onto the bank, and we jump up and we run up to the little bait store, and he'd let us all pick out a snack. So for him, it was always root beer and Hostess pies or pork rinds. And I loved pork rinds. And we would all get to pick out whatever we wanted, a drink and a bag of chips, or a candy bar or something. And that was always special. Then we go back down on the boat and go out in the water and eat our snack and enjoy our time. So, because that was always a treat, because then you didn't go out to eat like you did all the time. You didn't have all these wonderful things. And, it was rare for us to go out to dinner or out to eat. And when we did, I remember going to McDonald's, and the 6 of us would eat for $6, $1 each, cheeseburger, french fries, and Coke. And sometimes, rarely, but that was a really big treat. So it was fun to, Dad realized that was a exciting thing that the girls like to do. We'd do that, enjoy our time on the boat.
The one early memory I have of the boat though is when I had not learned how to ski, and I think I was 5, and we had a raft, and so my dad said, just don't let go, just hold on, and it'll just pull you along, and
Just to get you
just to get
acclimated,
you
yeah.
used to being out in the water. So I just remember him saying, don't let go, don't let go. Well, I was riding along and then it flipped over, and so I didn't let go, and I just kept being pulled along underneath the water, and then, they stopped and everyone jumped
We're
in the
all like,
water.
let go, Annie.
I didn't let Then I learned how to ski.
So did your dad name the boat Charlie's Angels?
He
Or
did.
who? Okay. Wanted to clear that up. And
Apparently
And
that was-
Angels was in.
Apparently that was for Ann and Marilyn, not Carolyn and I.
That was a popular TV show, wasn't it?
Yeah. Right. Okay, I wanted to talk about, have you all talk about the big fire. I think that was in 1978 that you lost the barn, everything in it.
Yes.
And you were coming home from an event, sporting event.
Basketball game.
There were 3 barns on the property. So the one that most people saw was the one just east of our house in the middle of the yard, and it said Big Bear on the roof. So it's you could see it
The horse barn.
miles away, and that was really more a horse barn. It had horse stables in it, but it also housed a lot of the bigger tractors, had the hay mow in there, and they stored the baled hay in there to feed the animals. And then there were 2 others, the main cattle barn and then what we call the new barn, which was back the lane. But this main barn, one night, I think it was 1979,
That sounds right.
and we were coming home from an Olentangy basketball game, and our older sister Marilyn was a cheerleader then, and so we were all coming home. And as we just got over kind of that little area, Sawmill and Powell, you see this big orange bright, kind of blur in the sky, and Dad said, "Oh dear Lord, the house is on fire. We've lost everything." As we got closer and closer, we saw this huge fire. But thank goodness, as we got closer, we saw it was not our home, but it was the barn. And by that time, of course, the Powell Fire Department was there, all volunteer, and we were all just kind of panicking and couldn't believe it. And I think we were crying. And we pulled in, and I remember it was so interesting. We were kind of like, "What are you doing in the fire?" And by that time, had done everything they could, and they were just trying to keep the area wet. And I remember the Huffmans eating sandwiches, and we're like, "Why are you not fighting the fire?" And they're like, "Well, we've done all we can." I would say, "Stop eating sandwiches and tend to our fire." But they stayed there all night long and watered the side of our house so it wouldn't catch fire. But we all stood there and just watched everything burn. And there were no animals in the barn at the time, so we just lost equipment and things that could be replaced. But they found out it was arson. They never found out who the arsonists were.
Welcome to Marilyn, who has just driven down from Cleveland, Ohio. You'll recognize a 5th person at the table, so we're really happy to hear from her, and we're going to hear about Pi Day in a few minutes. But first, Cathy is going to tell us about a couple of humorous adventures that she had in the pond or with the pond.
The theme here seems to be, how did we get in trouble? But I know Ann talked about that we used to have friends ride the 3-wheelers and the 4-wheelers. And so when I was in college, one of the times I came home, brought some friends, and one was from New Jersey, and he had not ridden, really wasn't familiar with the rural life or farm life. And so he got a little bit too close to the pond and drove the 3-wheeler into the pond. And he was okay, but we had to get the 3-wheeler out of the pond. We put it back, put it away, and thought we had gotten away without Dad knowing that we'd driven the 3-wheeler into the pond. And then sometime later, he went to start it, and there was seaweed that just kind of blew out of the pipe at the end. So we actually didn't get away with it. But that was a fun memory.
And getting your muffler caught in the snowmobile was not fun for you either.
Oh, this is true too. Right. So another thing, I guess, that was on the negative side was when we would ride the snowmobiles. One time I had a scarf on, and it got caught in the fan of the snowmobile, and it just sucked the scarf into the motor with me in it. So I was knocked out. And when I woke up, I was sitting next to the snowmobile. I was by myself. And so this was kind of where the Chase Bank is now. There was a field to the east of that. And one of the farmhands, Harry Justice, was driving by in the pickup truck at the time. And I just waved my hands to him, and he came and just sort of scooped me up and took me home. And so that was a dangerous thing, because I remember I was about 12 and I read in the newspaper shortly thereafter about that same thing happening to another child not in Delaware County who had died, broken his neck. So from then on, we knew to tuck the scarves in. So we did try to be safe, and we were for the most part, but then occasionally, three-wheeler went into the pond, or scarf got stuck in.
But you had a problem with things like getting twisted, like when she was baking 4-H and she was mixing icing, her hair, she had really long brown hair, and her hair got twisted in the beaters, and she had pink icing everywhere.
Yeah,
So
she
I
was
think
at the sink, Mom.
Some of us were a little more accident prone than others.
We did a lot of baking, and that was another fail for me. Yeah, but you had asked at the beginning what are some of the earliest memories, and my earliest memories are related to baking and the smell in the kitchen. We really never bought pre-made anything. Homemade bread, and Mom was the 4-H advisor for years, and entered a lot of things in the Ohio State Fair and competed with making pies, and she'd give us 5 cents to write the recipe down, which had to be submitted with the pie entry. So that was one of the things I think that was a big part of the Powell community at the time, was the baking and the 4-H and the Pie Day.
Oh,
as
Pie
you called
Day.
it.
Pie Day.
That was your
Well,
favorite day.
That's a good opportunity to have Marilyn speak next about Pie Day, because you wrote extensively about it.
Pie Day was something that the community of Powell all looked forward to, and all the neighbors. It was so much fun because Mom would make 17 pies in one day. The Ohio State Fair had many categories. The one day was Pie Day. The Pie Day was the biggest because the routine was the day before Pie Day, she would block out at least an hour per pie and make fruit pies, pecan pie, pumpkin pie, cream pies, and we knew we had to stay out of the kitchen because Mom's a very laid back, kind person, but that day she was
Focused.
very focused. And so she would make all the pies that day, and then the next day they had to be down at the Ohio State Fair at the fairgrounds about 8 o'clock in the morning.
In the paneled station wagon. She
Yes.
put all the seats down in the paneled station wagon that we had, and it'd just be an array of all these pies.
Yes, and they had to be kept apart so they wouldn't slide together. And then one of us sometimes would ride in the back and to make sure that they didn't spread around and bang into each other. And of course we didn't wear seatbelts, back then. And then the best part though for us and for the Powell community, I think, was when all the neighbors came over, when Mom would bring home the pies, and she would slice them all, and Dad would help and make coffee and tea and sometimes homemade ice cream to go with the pies, and invite all the neighbors over. So, and it was just so much fun because everybody got to try all the pies, and then we would have each one out on the counter, and there were certain ones that won first place every year: the chocolate green pie, the pecan pie, the sour cherry pie, which won the Crisco Pie Bake Off contest in New Orleans. So it was really special. I think it brought the Powell community together, and everybody just kind of hung out at the farm and enjoyed the summer, and fun day, Pie Day.
How
Big
many
day.
people do you think? I mean, you're mentioning all these people. It had to be like 50 people or something that.
I don't recall, but I remember that people saw each other routinely, so we must have had kind of the same group every year. And in fact, one time Mr. Cozy said, well, did we vote on that person coming? Any extra was, but we did cut the slices really small, so they were just kind of little samples, so you could have as many samples as you wanted. It was a fun time.
So each pie was judged separately. So the apple pie might have won first place this year, and then maybe the raisin pie. Yes, there was a raisin pie would win. Yeah, so after they took a little sliver to judge each pie, then we had all of these extra pies, and that's when we came home and had this
Because we didn't want them to
go to
not be
waste.
eaten. I didn't want to say it.
But our mom had a reputation of just being the most wonderful baker. Well,
I just enjoyed baking. I still do.
and our teachers every year they'd look to see if they had a cordial, not for us, but to see what they would get at Christmas, because she would make these huge platters of all kinds of cookies and brownies and candies.
Well, and they put pictures in the Old Teenage yearbook. My friends always make fun of me as I took around the little plates of cookies. And there's a picture in the yearbook coming out of the office, like the principal's office, with my cookies, and underneath it, it's the biggest brown noser. My friends to this day always tease me about that. But
Well, I mean, still, all of our friends say, "Is your mom coming? Is she gonna bring pies?" I mean, and cookies.
just good memories of
Yeah.
And I think through 4-H again, I don't know how many people, young kids in the county, learned to bake at our house. So homemade bread, and that goes to what Cathy was saying with the smells, homemade bread and pies and things that, as we get older now and things are so much easier just to go out to the local bakery and purchase, to know, for example, like during COVID, we could, when bread was a shortage, getting hold of some yeast and making some bread and teaching our kids to do that.
Well, the great thing about growing up on the farm too was that we mentioned the community a lot, but there were so many community events that happened. Olentangy's 6th grade class every year would come for a field trip. Our dad gave tours all of the time. And the 4-H club, we did a lot of service community projects around the farm and painting the fire hydrants and cleanup efforts and things like that. And I remember one time I walked outside and there were these 2 huge peacocks just sitting on top of the barn, and they had escaped from the zoo. So we had to call the zoo and they came and got them, but there were always, funny things like that happening. Or even Betty White was there one time at the party house. There was some sort of fundraiser for one of her animal
And Jack
charities.
Hanna, had a lot of people, and a lot of our friends from high school would combine from the community. We had a motocross track. We all rode motorcycles, and so our friends would come over. We rode motorcycles, horses, all the hay rides, and so that was all about safety, but we still had a lot of fun.
And people might remember the Shamrock Golf Course. Before it was Shamrock Golf Course, which actually it's not even Shamrock anymore, is it?
No,
It's Verona.
That's gone. Okay,
Yeah.
so
It's
before that, it was called the Day Brothers, and there was a family that owned a tennis court and a barn there, and that was a place they used. But that field that was attached to the Day Brothers is where Dad kind of created a motocross track for
Jumps and
Yes.
we did have walks through the farm.
oh right, we had the cancer walk, the turkey
turkey
trot.
Mhm.
A lot of organizations would come and have their company picnics. The Limited came in the early 80s, and
Company picnics, family reunions,
Weddings.
Lots
tons
and lots of weddings. I'm sure if you ask 1 in 10 people around Columbus who've been here for 20 years or more, they know somebody who's been married at the farm, because they had so many either indoor or outdoor weddings that Big Bear used to cater. And so we'd see people coming and going with that.
do you remember when the cast of Annie came to the farm for some sort of, they were in town for a show and they ended up jumping on our trampoline with us?
Yes, so they were there, I think it was over Thanksgiving, and so the cast was there, I think they were at the Palace Theater for several days, and they hired Big Bear to cater their Thanksgiving dinner for all the cast and crew. And I think we were outside jumping on a little trampoline, and all the girls you'd seen coming out and looking, and finally some of the adults brought them over, and they were telling us, that they were here and part of Annie, and they were singing, and
They needed a break.
They needed a break.
And then another good thing about growing up on the farm and the community sharing in the experiences was that we were not on our cell phones. We didn't use electronics. I mean, we used our imagination, and creativity was ubiquitous. I mean, we developed our imaginations, and built forts in the haylofts, made trails, built forts.
You were always making us do talent shows. Do you remember? You made us.
Yes,
She was our
this is true.
director and musical.
Well, that's because they had talent, I guess. So,
Some of us.
yeah.
You were the director.
Yeah. One of the things I think a lot of people in Powell remember was the big blizzard of, is it 78?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's when the community really came together in Powell. I mean, I don't know how many feet of snow it was, but I just remember all of us as neighbors, I shouldn't say us because I was younger at the time, but Dad and Mom would, Dad got all the bobcat out and the snowmobiles, and he would go around, and people literally were stuck in their cars on the side of the road along Sawmill Road, and would rescue people and take them back to their homes, or he would load up the sled behind the snowmobile and take food to people who were stranded in their homes. And the whole community at that time, everyone pulled together, all the people who had snowmobiles, all the people who had access to tractors, to help plow each other's driveways, to help start their cars if they were dead on the side of the road, or and so that was a great time, I think, for Powell as an example of what community should be. And it'd be very different, I think, today, but we were all very proud, that all of the families in the community came together to help each other.
Mm-hmm. The beginning of the snowstorm, we always wanted snow because we had snowmobiles, and Dad wanted to always get them out, but he would take the snowmobiles and go with his buddies to Michigan because we didn't have a lot of snow in Columbus. So when we did have the snowstorm in 78, in the beginning, I know Dad and I went out in the storm initially, and Dad and I rode behind all the way up from the farm to the railroad tracks, and we saw the police, and I thought that I was going to get in trouble from the police because maybe we weren't supposed to be out, and but Dad and I, we pulled right over to the police, and Dad immediately asked what we could do to help, and that's when that whole ball started rolling of getting the food out to people, helping people that were stuck in their houses, and it was so exciting, but also very fulfilling to be able to use something so fun that snowmobiles to help people, and like you said, Boo, coming together and as a community, it was really, really exciting and fun. We learned a lot too.
Yeah. And some of these same people who were rescuing people were the ones who were volunteering at the fire department, or helping out as needed. That's how Powell rolled back then, and so that's what made it a great place to grow up in, a great community.
Well, I'm really thrilled that you're all sharing the involvement of the community, and for mom it's 60 years, but for you all it's less, right? Just got such good memories.
That was a good call. They appreciated that.
We're really fortunate to have you here today. And if we could just end, if I haven't missed something, we could end with each of you saying where you are physically, socially, whatever, family-wise, just a minute a person, maybe today, for people to see where you've been and now where you are. You want to begin, Marilyn?
Well, sure. I have a husband, Gary, and then a daughter, Flory, who is in New York City at college in her senior year, and then Lucas, our son, is 19 and he's at LSU at college. We live in Cleveland, but we are moving to New York, and we've lived in Houston just for a couple years, and then Cleveland the past 20 years. And I think I carry the farm with me always in so many ways.
Let's just go down the line. Carolyn?
I live in Mason, Ohio, which is near Cincinnati, near Kings Island, with my husband Paul, and we are blessed with 2 children. Catherine, who is 22, graduated from The Ohio State University. That's right, I have to get in my Buckeyes.
That's right.
And then our son Will is a sophomore at Notre Dame. And we really they've heard so much about the farm throughout the years, and we're just grateful. They love hearing the farm stories, and whenever I'm telling something, they'll always say, well, she grew up on a farm, you know. So, because, you know, everything comes from that. And what I find that I carry with me from the farm and from Powell and this community is just the importance of faith, of family, and community, and like I said, giving back and service. And that's something that I will always credit Mom and Dad for, but then also coming from Powell, and Powell will always be our home. I am starting my 25th year with Johnson & Johnson. I've been blessed. I've just been in healthcare my whole life in a variety of roles, and that's part of, again, what I like to do is just be a part of helping others.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you. Anne?
I am currently living just 5 minutes north of Powell. I've moved away. I've lived in St. Louis and Memphis, Tennessee, but most of my life I've been in Central Ohio, and I have 4 children who have all gone through the same Olentangy school system that we did. And I've been in marketing and communications my whole career, and now I work for the Bureau of Workers' Compensation as the communications manager.
Okay, thank you. Kathy?
I don't live far either from here. I live over in Tartan Fields and am married to Tom, who's an attorney, as am I. We have 3 daughters. Emily is an emergency department physician in Atlanta. Bridget is a medical student at Duke, and Ellen is a law student at Ohio State. And we just like being around Powell. We feel like we're the old Powell, or the original Powell people. So we enjoy seeing the landscape as it was and as it is now.
One of the things that drives my children crazy, though, is when we drive around town, I'll say, oh, that's where the Blackstones live, and that's where that used to be Barbie's Dairy Twist, and it makes them crazy. But you can't help,
Yes.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
sharing it with the kids.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Or my
Reliving.
son will say, you climbed that silo? I'm like, yeah, like,
Yeah. Wow.
hours.
Right. So Diane, we began with you. What would you like to say about where you are right now,
Well,
besides here?
I feel like I don't have a lot on my agenda every day, and yet I stay busy. I enjoy the things I do, which is a lot of baking, and I do some things for church, like on the bereavement committee. I go to the Y to exercise, kind of minimal things, go to lunches, and just enjoy life.
Yeah. And I'd like to end with the fact that you are still judging at the Ohio State Fair. Is that true?
It is true, yes. I haven't missed a fair since 1965 with the entering and the judging. I've been judging for the last 20 years, and I did judge this year. So it's fun.
That's wonderful. I just
Bless.
can't thank you all enough for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Share our
having, yes.
stories.
Thank
It's
you
our
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
Are you still baking for the fair?
No, I haven't been baking since I won that contest. I was like, I'm going to hang it up while I'm lucky. I was lucky once, and I'm not going to push it. So that was 91, and I've been judging since like 92.
That is one of your fondest memories, though, isn't it? Winning that contest and going with Dad down to
Well,
New
yes,
Orleans.
because we said this is just like a miracle. Because, you know, you put something in the oven, and sometimes it turns out, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So that day it did. So
And out of 51 entries, I mean, that's.
Across the
Well, we
country.
said
Yeah, that's
where,
crazy.
but there's, you know, a lot of luck to, you know, you'll back me up on this. Sometimes it turns out.
Yes.
So,
We had a party back at the pond one time, and Mom and Sherry and all of the parents did this skit where they acted like they were performing a surgery behind this white sheet,
oh,
and they had a big light, so they would hold up grapes and say, "Oh, these are his
Intestines.
eyeballs or something.
They were the eyeballs.
Yeah, the intestine that was,
soft and
yes.
And you remember Marvin Simcox? He was such a hoot. He was holding up like the sausages and being
I'm sure he
real
was.
silly.
Yes.
And they had worms, and that was
Yes.
spaghetti.
Oh,
And
was
yes.
apricot was the ear.
Oh, you've got a good
Yes, she
memory.
does, I'm telling
That
you.
was
I remember that. I think that party, well, at least one of them back there was a bunch of us turned 30 that year.
Oh my.
Oh,
That makes sense. That makes sense.
that does.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
there were Cal and Kay
Yes.
and Danny and Ann and
Yeah.
you
I
guys
saw-
and us.
Kay and talked with them last night, and Cal told about having driven a plane over the farm to try to help locate the cattle.
When they got out.
They yes, because they brought them up from a big truck and they were thirsty, so they went right for the pond, and then they went into the cornfields,
Yes.
and they couldn't get them, so they had to get this plane to fly over. And Cal was leaning out. He said the door was open of the plane. He was leaning out, relaying downstairs. They're in this area, and then because they were afraid they'd get out on the road and get an
And
accident.
we had the plain story about the Buckeye Valley Olentangy rivalry, where the football coaches asked Dad to fly the plane over and toss out flyers pretend like they were from Buckeye Valley. So it was Thursday night.
To incite the
Friday.
boys. Mhm.
Yeah, and so Dad flew his plane over and had a friend throw flyers out on our Olentangy football field that were supposedly from Buckeye Valley, and it enraged the football players to
Play better,
Yeah.
play harder.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember going to the Big Bear on the Lane Avenue with Mother. I was very young.
I did too.
Yeah.
My
And
parents
I remember how
pulled me
big it
away.
was. And I had
Yes.
forgotten that it had been a roller skating rink. But I feel that, you know, when in
Yes.
the memory, it was just cavernous and seemed like
Mm-hmm.
did it have a rounded roof?
I believe
I
it
think
did.
so.
It's been
It did.
several
Yeah.
things, a dance
Yeah.
hall and a horse stall and all that. And nowadays they would never be able to have a live bear out in front. You know, people would be
Yeah, the bear. And the cave.
fussing about
So
that.
how often did they have a live bear?
I think just at the beginning.
Uh-huh.